I guess it's hard for me to think about the book in those terms because I think about it very specifically in terms of James and his story, not a critique of society or but no, I think yes, the book does suggest that James does go to university, but whether he stays there or I mean I wanted that to leave that open, and I think James, even if he goes to university, I didn't see that as an endorsement of him accepting society. I think it's just him moving forward and trying to get new experiences, different experiences, and then making of them whatever he may. I think both, and also again, I thought whenever I write a book, I get very involved about the book. I mean, in the world of the book, and so in this book, it helped me writing a book about a character who was much younger than I was. It helped by setting the story in New York City, where I live and where I've spent a lot of time. And so by thinking about what it was like to be a teenager in New York City, I felt, give James a reality. And there were certain things I had questions about, I forget now, but some details where I wasn't sure. And I asked I asked teenagers sort of, well, if you were going to read a book, what book would you read or something? But also I sort of cheated because I gave James a lot of his passions for music and literature and books are my own passions. So I feel like he's not a typical teenager.
Yeah.
He has some unusual interests. I think it varies with different people. With James, I think his irony, his anger comes out of depression and comes out of, I think when you feel alone in the world and when you feel unhappy in the world, I think one of the ways that gets expressed is through irony or through anger. And so I don't see James as your typical angry young person. I find him more, I see his sorrow coming more from sorrow and from depression, and that him dealing with that by being angry, which I think it's interesting because I think that works better in the book than it does in the film, because I think depression is something that's very internal, it's very much inside you, and so in the book I could explore that, whereas I feel like in the film it's a more difficult topic to explore. Yes, some of the dialogue is taken from the book, although the one character that's been most changed from the book to the movie is the character of the therapist. She's no longer, in the book, she's Rowena Adler, a psychiatrist, and now in the movie she's a different character. She's Hilda Temple, who's a life coach. So she's a very different character. So some of the conversations that James had with Rowena Adler are duplicated in the film, but most of them are not, because the characters have been changed, and so they have a very different relationship in the film than they do in the book. I think it's very hard to be a novelist now and not think about movies as you're writing a book, just because movies are such a strong cultural presence in our world, and I try not to think too much about that, and to concentrate and focus on the book. And you mentioned James's interest in language, and for me, one of the things I enjoy most about writing is language, and so I try and think more about the language than about the how that would represent itself cinematically, I guess. But I think very much it's interesting that I think very much in terms of scenes when I write, and sort of editing, sort of how you move from one scene to another, how scenes in my book begin and how they end, in a way that I think is cinematic. And as far as Italian cinema goes, I love Italian cinema. I actually prefer, some of my favorite directors and movies are European films, either French or Italian, just because I think I'm just more interested in them than American films, because I think they do explore more of the internal world of the characters, and they're not as much about action or violence as American films, which doesn't interest me so much.